Welcome everyone to this penultimate session of ICDRI 2022, where we'll be discussing the outcomes of the three-day event. I request Mr. Kamal Kishorji to moderate this session. So over to you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Here we are in Delhi on a very warm afternoon, summer afternoon. We've had 3 intense days of ICDRI 2022. A whole range of issues have been discussed. The last session in this studio discussing interdependencies in infrastructure systems, very provocative, a lot of perspectives from the field, looking at political economy of infrastructure development and so on. So now is the time to wrap up and get a sense of what are some of the things, some of the key themes that are emerging from the discussions we've had over the last 3 days. So what we are going to do in this session, right after this session, is the closing ceremony where our CDRI's Governing Council co-chairs, Administrator Power and Dr. P.K. Mishra will join us. That session starts at 4:30, so I will try to complete this session by 4:25 or so. So the structure we will follow is to keep it as interactive, as reflective as possible. I will first invite Mona to make a short presentation on what is the sort of summary or outcome of the last 3 days. And then I have a panel. Besides me, there are 5 here. The stage is small, so we have 2 distinguished colleagues out in the front row, colleague from Nepal, Sib from Brussels. So we'll hear from them what are their 1 or 2 big takeaways from what we have heard over the last 3 days. So to move ahead, Mona, if you can present a summary of what we've done in the last 3 days, please.
Thank you. Yesterday in the evening, first of all, greetings to everyone. I think it's the fag end of the conference where at least I'm a bit tired. So greetings everyone, and I want to share with you what happened yesterday in the evening. So somebody asked me, how's the conference going? And I said, we're enjoying. And the person was like, okay. I said, no, this is not trivial enjoyment that I'm talking about. It's sheer joy to listen to colleagues who've come from across the world, some of them joining virtually, some of them here, our colleagues from India, partners, people we haven't met in years, at least 2 years we haven't met. So it's such a joy, and also connect with fellow professionals. So that is the first point I want to highlight, and congratulations to everyone who's contributed to the interactions for making it so rich that, it's overwhelming actually in some sense. Now with this task, I hope I can do justice to the depth and breadth of what we've heard, what we've discussed, but I'll still use a few slides to capture the key points for you. May I have the slides, please? Next, please. So just on the vitals, this conference, we enjoyed and benefited from the partnership with the US government, and we are indeed appreciative of all the support, the financial, the technical, the camaraderie that we've enjoyed with the team. Thank you very much to our colleagues from the US government for making this possible. We had 25 sessions across the 3 days covering policy, regional, sectoral, and thematic issues. And there were sessions that were focused only on the futuristic thinking, so that was another highlight. We had about 90 odd global experts from across the world working with us, contributing to the discussions. There were featured sessions led by the USAID and the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management of Netherlands. So that was another highlight of this edition of the conference this year. The conference itself was built up with a series of pre-conference dialogues, DRI dialogues that we have at CDRI. So we had one dialogue around port infrastructure, resilience of port infrastructure. We had another one on knowledge management and communities of practice. And we had one on the resilience of hydrogen infrastructure. So the sessions did benefit a lot from all of that groundwork with our partners who managed to deliver the sessions with us today. The conference also, on the sidelines of the conference, we had a masterclass running on critical aspects of certification systems for infrastructure resilience. So that, the last session of the masterclass was yesterday with the panel discussion, and we've got, very overwhelming responses to, the session and what people have taken away. That was the other highlight. We can move on to the next slide, please. In terms of what we heard and what we learned in the conference itself, basically I think there are 3 or 4 key highlights there, 4 actually. The first one is in keeping with the theme of the conference itself, to look at infrastructure development, resilience of infrastructure with people as the focus. So we, that belief was reinforced. We need to sharpen our focus on the most vulnerable. And we heard that resilient infrastructure, really we are talking now in the context of today with regard to, so we're talking of future-ready transport, power, and telecom infrastructure that are really the backbones of the economies that we exist and thrive in. Then the other thing that we heard was around human-centered approach. That was actually center staged in several sessions. And the idea is to place users at the heart of planning, design, financing, monitoring, maintaining infrastructure systems, and making sure they continue to deliver services irrespective of, the shocks and stresses that they encounter. Then, of course, the focus on vulnerable regions and countries, the small island developing states and the LDCs, these emerged as areas of focus for all of us who attended the conference. There was a clear track in terms of actions that we need to take up for promoting technological innovation and disruptive solutions to promote resilience. And the idea here was to embrace the complexity of the situation at hand. We are dealing with a situation that's evolving rapidly in the context of climate change that we are encountering now. And sectoral interdependencies is something that adds to that complexity. So the idea is to make sure that our innovations and technological developments are responsive to this complexity. I can move forward from there. The other thing that I want to highlight for this particular track is the new solutions, for example, the whole reliance on hydrogen as an energy source for the future. In many cases, we are just scratching the surface of what the solution may be. There is a need to dive deeper, make it more scientific and engaging, and of course connect it with the impacts all of these solutions will have on people and their lives. So that's the other thing there. We can move on to the next slide, please. All of this has to be supported by a policy environment that is equally forward-looking. And the drivers of risk have to be embraced, acknowledged, and built into our policy-making process. We heard about this particular aspect this morning also. There is a need to foster synergy between different stakeholders, and you do need a progressive policy environment that will foster this kind of a synergy. With regard to knowledge building and capacity development, I think a key highlight was the possibility of learning that countries and organizations and institutions can exchange with each other in a peer learning format. And knowledge exchange across diverse economies, scales of operation, and across the entire value chain. That was the highlight there. We can move to the last slide, please. This was the other pillar that emerged loud and clear for us, partnerships. I think this was one point that resonated across all the sessions. We need to collaborate more. We need to collaborate more meaningfully and deeply rather than just, exchanging notes in conferences. And we need to find ways of staying engaged with each other in more meaningful terms. I think these are the key highlights with regard to the outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mona. That was an elegant summary of what we discussed. Well, it was an elegant set of highlights of what we discussed. We also discussed finance. We also discussed some other sectors, nature-based solutions, and so on. So I will not speak much right now, but I would like to hear what Laurent has to say and what is your one or two big takeaways from the 3 days we've had here. And for the audience, although most people know you, maybe people online may not, so you can introduce yourself as well.
Right, thank you very much, Kamal. So I am Laurent Ledanois. I am the team leader of the cooperation section here in New Delhi for the European Union. I've only been here 9 months this time, but I was in India 15 years before, so it's a coming back, so probably some resilience to being able to live in India and with India. You mentioned 2 big takeaways. I would like to try to make 5 small interconnected points, and I would like to start with my first takeaway would be actually the presentation from the president of Madagascar, and which I will want to listen again because I've thought it was really hugely interesting. To me, it's a call for action for all of us, and it embodies, I think, the spirit I think Kamal and your team wants to have with CDRI. Meaning, as I understand, it's not about let's say CDRI helping others. It's about the seeds and the member countries also to bring. So it's really a two-way traffic. It's definitely not one-way traffic. And I think from Madagascar we heard, or we could hear between the lines, but very clear calls for support, for getting support from CDRI and others. But surely they also have a lot to share, because they've gone through all these cyclones. They have a lot of learning by themselves, maybe with limited means, surely. But I think they have a lot to give as well. And really, I think so for me, there's been 3 days of deliberations, and I think we would all hope as members of CDRI that really CDRI delivers now. I actually started, but let's say it's easy for all of us to talk. It's sometimes much harder to actually act, and I think definitely some countries and some seeds need us to act together. So how we will be able to do this, that's another story, but I think it's very important. My next point is on partnerships, and I would say I would try to limit it to Europe. I mean, obviously we want to go much beyond Europe. We want to be with CDRI, with the US, with all members, that's for sure. But I think for us, Europe, like India, we are a mix of 27 member states, and we have to get our acts together, we have to work together. We have colleagues here from GIZ, and we had France. I don't think France is here today, but we had them. So for us, it's a very stimulating challenge and opportunity to work really well together, so that we support well together. We think we can give a lot to CDRI, and we can learn a lot and get a lot from CDRI, that's very sure. But we have to work well together. It's very, very important. Even more important, for instance, that we have our let's say, Build Back Better strategy, the global gateway. And in one of the elements, for instance, is to bring, we have a habit in countries, let's say, to work as the European Union delegation and member states. That's our member, to work well with member states. With the global gateway, we have to go a little bit beyond that and bring in the EU private sector, the businesses. But the challenge for us, very clearly, I take from the previous session, was this issue of private benefit and social benefit. Mm-hmm. So for us, basically, if we bring in only the private sector, it's not enough. It will be surely good for, let's say, investments in infrastructure, mm-hmm. but we need also to bring in, let's say, the good members from Europe, from civil society in a very broad sense. And for us in civil society, we also include think tanks, universities, research institutes. So grassroots NGOs, but also research institutes. So it's very important to bring this so that they reflect the views of the people. So that will be a challenge for us, but we have to make it. I mean, we have no choice. My fourth point is on nature-based solutions, and that echoes a little bit this last point. We have heard also, and we know that nature-based solutions can be part of the answer. And in a sense, let's say to to sensitize the wealthy, let's say, infrastructure needs have been assessed financially worldwide. So we say, okay, there's a big money, so that's to say, okay, we need to support because there's this infrastructure gap. At the same time, sometimes maybe these evaluations have been based on expensive infrastructure. And sometimes they are less expensive and sometimes less expensive and even more effective infrastructure. So I'm not saying we have to go just for the nature-based. An airport will still need some types of infrastructure which are not nature-based, but we really have, I think we have a duty and a mandate to also invest on nature-based solutions for the people. My last point is I started with the president of Madagascar on the first session, and my last point is from the last session before this one, and I would like to hopefully quote, not too badly, Rebecca Nadine on session when she says for her resilience is not just about infrastructure, but it's about what connects people, and that was echoing also other presentations on the infrastructure as an asset and what connects everything. But I will reflect on that one. I know I am not sure I fully understood. I did understand, but I want to read more about what she says because I think this is fundamental. And that's the whole issue, I think, about hard and soft and the governance which is behind. So much to take away. And as some of us said, I think after 3 days, to have such stimulating discussions on the last sessions, I can only say congratulations to ICDRI and to the US and to all those who've organized these 3 days because,
Thank you very much, Laurent. I think your exhortation based on what the president of Madagascar said, let's move from talking to acting. Broad-based partnership, not just government, but also civil society, think tanks, so that we reflect multiple perspectives. And this whole thing of nature-based solutions, what is it that we're talking about in terms of resilience? Is it about assets or about connecting people? So thank you for that. Let me now turn to Anilji. If you can just...
Thank you, Kamalji. What an amazing 3 days. I have 3 points, 3 takeaways from these 3 days. Firstly, we've clearly seen, and I want to echo Lauren's words, call for action. I think over the last 3 days, we've been able to really see some excellent examples as how do we understand the trend, the changing risk patterns across not only the mountain systems, but across the world, and the need to really take this and translate into action. And so this is where the partnerships through CDRI and through a lot of development partners, knowledge institutions, private sector, is where we could really make a difference. That's where Government of Nepal and the India National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authorities, including the previous National Reconstruction Authorities, especially the last 6 years of learnings around people-centered infrastructures, is something that we'd be able to kind of offer to this initiative to take it on across the scale, across a lot of other countries where there's so much of need. But on the other hand, also, we've seen signature kind of changes within the mountain systems all across Himalaya and perhaps other mountain systems around the world. This is where the capacities within these mountain countries are very much limited, especially in terms of understanding risk, transitioning to the new set of infrastructures, resilient infrastructures that we needed. So this is where the call for action to really kind of take it and translate into action where we bring in a lot of partnerships to really understand these complex cascading hazards so that we are able to kind of make our infrastructures resilient and our communities resilient from future shocks. These are 2 points that I want to make. But how do we take it forward? That's the third point that I want to make it today. We've a saying in Sanskrit and in Hindi as well as Nepali, tan, man, and dhan. These are 3 things, tan being bodies. I see this August gathering as a great gathering of bodies, like networks of institutions with knowledge and willingness to support. Man is the mindset, the tools that we all have been able to really kind of come together, share some of these ideas, these tools over the last 3 days. But there's a huge body of knowledge that we could really build on. And then obviously to translate this into action requires dhan. Dhan is financing as well. Different set of financing. maybe through the government systems, like the one that was explained this morning for hydrogen energies, or it could be for building resilience, for infrastructures, for nature-based solutions. Financing is a clear component for it, but this also could be raised through private sector, through other equity, through bonds, and those kind of things. So this is where I see, again, getting these dhan man dhan to really translate these into action. Specifically for focusing on complex mountain systems is where we could start some of those actions on. We, especially from the government of Nepal, the National Disaster Risk and Management Authority, we really look forward to working to really translate some of these outcomes into actions through perhaps some prioritized initiatives in the Nepali and the Himalaya mountain systems that could be of use and replicated all across the world to really embody this idea of resilient infrastructures so that we're able to save our economies, save our systems, and really go through a resilient future systems. That's all I wanted to kind of say as an outcome of these 3 days. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Anilji. Very insightful reflections talking about changing risk patterns. How do we move forward? And I particularly liked your focus. Obviously, you are championing the cause of mountain states. So just as we have a focus on SIDS, perhaps we should also focus on mountain states. There's already a lot of work happening in mountain states, which is anchored in Nepal. We have to see how we can sort of engage with that and take this conversation forward. So let me now turn to Rav Aulach. She is a key partner of CDRI. As part of Miyamoto team, she is providing support to the CDRI Secretariat. So Rav, your reflections.
Thank you so much, Kamalji. The topic or the one takeaway that I really want to emphasize is nothing new. This has been talked about for in many sessions, but it was so much reinforced in just about every session that I heard or I read was the importance of not only resilience of infrastructure but of communities. And that sort of came in every session in some way or the other. And that to me reinforced how important it is to put that people-centered approach first and foremost. And what was stressed and made more critical than ever was the need to adopt a very human approach to infrastructure. The testimonies from Fiji and Rajasthan pointed to this fact that sensitized us to the importance of this approach. And in many other sessions, I heard similar need to really focus on this approach first and foremost. In the recovery and reconstruction session, Mr. Miyamoto stressed on the need for preemptive actions for preparing communities for disaster. And the stress on preparing these communities was really highlighted very well. The need, and also emphasized, was the need to focus on local expertise and local materials, for rebuilding and reconstruction is very important. The other point was communication with the homeowners should not just be with the engineers. The engineers are great, but with the social workers, the local social workers. So that was considered very important. So in a nutshell, it's not a question just of looking at the cost-benefit analysis, but also looking at the social questions, the equity questions, and environmental questions that are equally important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rav. You very much validate one of the two central themes of this year's conference, which is putting people at the center. So we are not talking about resilience of infrastructure for its own sake, but to actually effect resilience for communities. With that, let me now turn to Professor Ravi Sinha. Ravi, your reflections.
Thanks, Kamal. So this was a very insightful and extremely invigorating 3 days spent during the conference. And I have quite a few actually takeaways, but I will just highlight some of the very important ones for me. As already reiterated by others, that this conference has again highlighted the importance of people-centric approach in the case of infrastructure. But I just want to refine the discussions which have been made on that, on this dais, that we need to look at the lens slightly differently. So for example, if we are looking at the telecom infrastructure, obviously it's a network, it's a system of systems. But we don't go beyond that why do we have it, for whom do we have it. So the fact that people need to connect, and that is the reason why we have the telecom network. This particular is a missing link, because of which all the standards, all the parameters of performance are technical parameters, and they do not explicitly include human element anywhere. And the same is repeated in infrastructure after infrastructure, whether it's a transport infrastructure, aviation infrastructure, any kind of infrastructure we look at. Quite obviously, they serve the needs of the people. So in that way, they are people-centric. But what is it that they provide to the people, and what will happen if they are not able to provide the particular infrastructure to the people, is very implicit and hidden. And I think this conference brought out the fact that it should be explicit, it should be at the center of the consideration. And that brings me to the second important point, that while resilience may have a global connotation, the acceptance level of resilience has to have a local context on the basis of the people, the society, and the economies in which that particular infrastructure is being used. And if we start going that path, then it becomes all the more important to have the people at the center, because people's coping capacities are going to be different in different places. And that should guide the standards to which the resilience should be, say, aspired, at least initially. It's a decades-long process, so we may give ourselves time for global standards a few decades from now. But right now, it should be a very, very local, a local connotation on the basis of the acceptance criteria, which is acceptable to the people in that area. The third point, which I thought was very interesting, was the fact that interdependence of countries in the context of disaster risk management is quite clearly increasing. I mean, this is something which is very obviously known to the practitioners of this field for a long time. So that is not the interesting part. The interesting part is that to this we have to juxtapose the fact that overall the global economy is deglobalizing. So the global supply chains are becoming weaker. People are trying to not strengthen it back, but people are trying to find out ways of local supply chains being created so that you can deglobalize. So on the one hand, the human survival would be better served if there is greater globalization. On the other hand, the economic system on which the entire modern society is based is becoming deglobalized. And there is going to be some sort of a conflict in the sense of how this spills over into disrupting this entire global effort of improving resilience. That has to be kept in mind. And this came out as a very interesting to me output of this conference. The last point I would like to make is it takes me back to the 1970s. That there is a need to think global and act local. So whether it is the Committee of Parties, whether it's the global platform, the IPCC reports, the GARs, all of them are global products, global outputs. And they play a critical role in articulating the challenges being faced by disaster risk and by the impacts of climate change. So if we don't have that, then it would be very difficult to have global consensus on the importance of tackling this. But the actual problems are faced at a very local level. So if we only aspire for global solutions, we will not serve the people as well. We need to also balance this with the local needs, the local capacities, and the local programs to provide more specific, you can say more specific service to the people, by the people, of the people, so that they can become more resilient, they can become safer. So that's the last point I had, that we are back to the 1970s of thinking locally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for those reflections. Again, a reinforcement of putting people at the center, looking at the local context. The tension you highlighted between interdependence and yet trying to keep systems self-contained at the local level is something which is very real, especially in recent years. We'll come back to that point, but before that, let's hear from Shouvik.
Thank you, Kamal. Last 3 days I've been alarmed and inspired in equal measure. Alarmed because there was a lot of information, knowledge that I wasn't aware of, like the magnitude of the problem or the complexity of the moving pieces, interconnectedness. And I thought about it, and it comes down to having this knowledge socialized and institutionalized. So I think that's a call to action for CDRI to spread the word about the problem, the complexity, and the possible solutions, and create a community of practice of people who can translate these into solutions and help policymakers develop specific solutions on ground. The second takeaway for me was somebody mentioned in the last session that any investment that is made in preparing for a disaster is 1/3 of the expenditure that is eventually made in responding to that, plus the impact of any expense that you make in disaster resilience has long-term, much more economic, social, financial benefits. That should be more widely known. I don't think that is widely known and understood in terms of pathways on how this translates into economic benefits, financial benefits. Once that we are able to do that linkage, I think that will help us mobilize more public and private investments into disaster resilience. And again, somebody mentioned in the last session that investment should come into disaster resilience, no matter where it comes from, public or private, but there should be more investment in that. I think knowledge comes again at the basis of it. So I look at CDRI to spread the word, create more people who understand the problem and can figure out solutions through this. Thank you.
Thanks, Shouvik, for highlighting again the complexity of understanding interdependence, and in that interdependent environment, looking at how do we build resilience, how do we attract investments into that. Mary Tyler, your reflections?
Thank you very much, Kamal. Well, when we think about leaving no one behind, I think often of the most vulnerable, women and children. We think of hospitals and schools and the vulnerability of those structures during natural disasters. We also need to remember those with disabilities so that they can quickly exit in the event of an emergency, particularly if they have physical disabilities, and also to build structures that are accessible to the disabled. So really it is that people-centered approach that's very important. Another theme that comes to mind is just my own responsibilities and call for action and how we can involve USAID and the US government in a greater role to support CDRI. We're so fortunate to have very talented staff in our over 100 missions around the world. Many of those missions are located in places where CDRI already has bilateral partners. How can we best reach out to our colleagues, utilize their technical expertise to support these really important endeavors? I'm so lucky to be here with Veena Reddy, our mission director, who's here in the audience now, who has been a champion of CDRI So I hope that other missions will join hands with her in support in the future for the good work that CDRI does. Finally, I want to thank those other embassies who are present tonight, our colleagues from the European Commission, our UK colleagues who started the incredible IRIS initiative that we hope to continue to carry the ball forward with on new initiatives for resilient island states, GIZ, the Japanese, the Australians. We have such a wonderful collaborative community here, many of us meeting for the first time after working months together online, in person, and that's been one of the greatest delights of this conference for me personally, is meeting others who are champions of this issue. I'd like to also acknowledge Miyamoto International, our partner, who is helping to work on system strengthening with our colleagues here at CDRI, and they have many of their staff embedded within the CDRI Secretariat and working very hard. And finally, I'd like to thank the CDRI team who have been working many, many hours to make this conference a success. Thank you all so very, very much. We're very excited to continue to partner with you and to build upon what we've already achieved and to explore new opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Tyler. I think your reminder of taking an inclusive approach, focus on persons with disability, how they benefit from infrastructure systems. And those of you who attended the last session of the first day saw a glimpse of the kinds of capacities US government institutions can bring to this effort, would recognize how much is out there and how it would be a challenge to see how we can actually channel it to address specific problems, but I think we are on our way to doing that. Now, before I sort of ask some provocative questions and ask for reflections from anyone here in the audience or online, I want to ask if Sib wants to say something. Sib, can you step up here so that the camera you can be in light? And yes, please.
Thank you, Kamal. So my name is Sib here. I work at the European Commission in Brussels in the Directorate General for International Partnerships, responsible for our relations with India. So, I mean, actually, over the past few days, what I'm left with primarily as a reflection is, while, of course, we all know the challenges involved in infrastructure and disaster resilience, I've actually become a lot more optimistic based on a lot of what I heard this week. So I think there's two avenues, or at least two areas where that comes to mind in particular. The first is that we've heard a lot about the necessity of an integrated approach, across DRR. And I mean, of course, as a practitioner in the area, we talk about proper planning and life cycle management. But when I think about the kind of tools that we've used in the past, environmental impact assessments, sustainable impact assessments, there's clearly a lot more which is available. And I think the technology that is available now that we've seen this week, that private sector operators have demonstrated, is playing and will play a massive role, and we need to be much more connected in using those tools that private sector has, because we've seen a lot of them which is based on data. So technology that we've seen, for example, in the health sector, connecting users to different agencies are being used, or that kind of system are being used in the DRR area. So that's also applicable to risk financing as well. So I think that's reason to be optimistic for sure. The second thing is maybe is a bit broader. It's in relation to maybe financing, but also more holistically how we define development, how we define the infrastructure challenge. Because I think also what we've seen this week is an acknowledgement that the way we define that has changed. It is evolving, right? So this morning, I think it was, we heard from one of the ministers, I think, or in the Indian government, and who's talking about the work that is being done here in terms of the greening the financial system. So that is essential. I mean, without financing being the financial system being greened, the channels of finance need to be done sustainably, then we would face a massive challenge, or we do face a massive challenge without that being done. So I think the work that's being done internationally, and of course the Commission is involved in that. It has the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, of which India is a member. The taxonomy that's involved, the taxonomy that India is working on, these kinds of things are going to be essential, because it's about also, making sure that the right signals are sent to investors. That's important. But what's also important, and I think maybe this is definitely a conversation which is going to go forward, is how investors look at what is actually good for everybody, in terms of not just short-term profit, but also about long-term sustainability, in terms of defining what is good for everybody in a long-term way. So that, I think, with these systemic changes, with these regulatory changes, with all the kind of developments that are going on, I think that's definitely, I see reasons to be optimistic. So that's where I think I'd stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sib, for those reflections. I think the whole point of how do we make a case with investors for long-term resilience, better return on investment over the long term for a large number of people. I think that's a challenge. Inviting or attracting private sector investments in this area is important. I share your sense of optimism, but at the same time, on some aspects, I think the 3 days left me more confused than I was before. But confusion is a good thing, because then you have something to look forward to. If you already know, then it's not very exciting, right? So the three things that I want to sort of pose is that, for 3 days, and even in this panel, everyone is talking about people-centered approach to infrastructure, etc. But I have heard relatively few solutions to how do you actually make it happen people-centered. Yes, we want our infrastructure systems to deliver services in a dependable, sustainable, and a high-quality manner for a large number of people. But how do you actually make it happen? When you look at how infrastructure planners are thinking about it, yes, they talk about outcomes. It's still very much, top-down. That's one question, and I would love to hear reflections on how do you actually turn it around. We started the conversation, but I don't think we've yet found very, tangible, proven solutions to turn this around. The second thing that which was there in the stage setting as well with Madam Mami Mizutori of UNDRR and Aroma Revi about working across silos and across sectors. That is beginning to happen. We had a presentation from the Department of Economic Affairs on the National Infrastructure Pipeline, looking at all the infrastructure together. Very impressive. But is that really enough? How do we go beyond looking at transport sector as separate from telecom, as separate from power? How do we look at it together and look at the collective outcome? So on these two questions, any reflections anyone has, I would like to take that. The first one comes from Laurent.
Yes, thank you very much, Kamal. I think when you mentioned about how to operationalize, or that's how I understand, a people-centered approach, I was thinking of what you said about the need to create a community of practice or of practitioners. I mean, if there is a community of practitioners, definitely it's going to bring in solutions to that. Or if it doesn't bring solutions, then it's not a community of practitioners. So that would be one way, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So as far as the policy of having a people-centered approach, I'm from telecom, so in telecom sector, there are all private players which are having 98% of the network, and to create a disaster resilient infrastructure, it costs a lot, and the sector is already in financial stress. So what I look at it is that we have a primary focus on non-infrastructure capacity building in terms of more of the training, more of the models, and in the trainings we bring in not only the telecom service providers, but also the OEMs who actually plan the network from the TSPs. So when OEMs who are planning, the planners come into the basic understanding, rather than going for a disaster management act or licensing condition, all that, if we bring a focus shift into them, then definitely it is going to make a change. That was one part, and second part is also covered in the second question of yours, that again for telecom service providers, we have to bring a confidence into them that this whole exercise is for the betterment of theirs. And for that matter, again the mock drill and the trainings have to involve the other infrastructure providers like transport or petroleum ministry or other ministries, so that whenever there is a disaster, they have to make their network up as soon as possible. And for that, they need a support from other state agencies or central agencies, which they are not getting to the extent which is required. So when we are going for a mock drill or for a workshop or for training, so at SDMA level itself, we would like to involve not only the TSPs, but also the other state and central agencies, so that they are also sensitized. So these are the 2 points, sir.
Thank you very much. Very, very good reflections. On one hand, at the planning stage, have capability to take a people-centered approach and to make a case that if you work across sectors, in the end, it is more effective, it is more cost efficient, and it is more resilient.
Thank you so much. Actually, while participating in all these three days and also today's interactions here, what I think the takeaway from my side is that actually there is a need to have to create a win-win situation for all the sectors, especially the government, the private sectors, and the people. And then we have to have the common level of the language so that everyone will be understanding in the same level. So how we can really create that? That is I think the core of the learnings that I have taken from this conference. Because if we create that, then everyone will be into that direction. And then every sector, either the government or the people or the private sector, they will be having the same level of the thinking, and then the decision making can be much more easy. And especially the decision making, when you talk, that is most important is the finance, the money, the investment. That is very important. And to make the investment either through the private sectors or the government or the people who are ultimately the payers or who will be paying for the services, whatever that the government or the private sectors will be making investment, that the people. Then the people will be in that level, they will understand that it is for the benefit of the people, it is for the benefit of the government, and it is also for the benefit of the private sector. So I think how we can create that sort of this conclusion, the outcome, and that is I think the core of the level of the understanding that we have to create. If we can create on that level, then I think we can find out the solutions, either the solutions in the technological aspects, solutions from the financing framework, and everything that will come up within that framework. I think that is the most important part that I just concluded from my side. Thank you.
Well, that's a very important point. Thank you. How do we look at resilience in a manner that it's resilience for everyone? So it's win-win for pursue resilience in a manner that it's a win-win for everyone. Shan, please.
Thank you, Kamal. My name is Shantanu Mitra. I'm with the British High Commission here. Just like to respond to your question, Kamal, with 3. Well, my basic point is that we need to not forget what we've learned about participatory development, because I think that's at the heart of all of this, how we do governance at different levels. And let me just identify 3. One is that say if you take a city where there's huge resilience issues, when cities are developing their plans, make sure that these are widely inclusive processes where stakeholders, including representatives of communities and including poor and vulnerable groups, are fully involved in that. And that requires the political will and interest to be open and inclusive. And often, we've been supporting these kind of processes with partners like the Asian Development Bank. You do find often the mayors and political leaders find political benefits in doing that. So that's one way of ensuring that the priorities are really address the needs of the people. Secondly, at the level of infrastructure assets and large-scale infrastructure, comes down to governance and accountability and transparency. And I think there's a lot to be learned from experiments in the past on citizen engagement in making sure information on performance is transparently provided and that there's good feedback mechanisms from users so that the utility managers can really understand what are the key issues and understand the performance of resilience investments they're making. And the third level is community level. I think there's a lot of we can learn from community-based adaptation approaches. And when it comes to community infrastructure, if you look at something like in India, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, great example of participatory planning and monitoring. So I think let's not forget about everything we've learned about participatory development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chan. What we know about participatory development applies equally to participatory efforts at building resilience as well. John.
Thank you very much. I think the question you're asking is actually at the heart of getting these things right. And I think let me introduce myself. Yes, I'm John Carstensen from Mott MacDonald, global but UK-based engineering and advisory business. And the example I would like to use is actually how we are trying to shift our business, because businesses in their nature profit-making entities, but we are actually trying to shift the mindset so the driver of what we do becomes the social outcome. And by having the social outcome as the purpose, as the objective, we believe we can become a business that will be profitable. But we're not starting off with the aim of making a profit. We're starting off with the aim of making a difference. And that change of mindset, which is not easy to achieve. I mean, that really requires something when you're trying to shift the mindset of 17,000 people in a global organization. But ultimately, it is at the heart of what we do. And therefore, it's about, when we're talking investment plans for infrastructure, when we're talking about all the things we're doing, it's to start off with what is the social outcome we are trying to achieve, and constantly keep that in mind as a business, as a government, as a community, and utilize those participatory approaches, but go beyond the we are just consulting with the public in this. This is actually about making sure that the public drives those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It really is a cause for optimism that consulting companies, engineering consulting companies, are talking about social outcomes of their work, and they have the confidence that if they achieve the social outcomes, they will also make profit. Are there any other reflections? Sarabjit and then Ram, and then Santosh, and then I will have to wrap up very quickly. So Sarabjit, if you can,
Sarabjit from UNICEF. Kamal, to your question on human-centered design and planning, 4 ideas. One, we learned in the session itself that when we look at the DPRs, the detailed project reports, can we count more sort of social scientists and behavioral scientists, etc., on the team along with the engineers? So I think that you can set a benchmark for that. Second point was measuring this integration. I think if so many interdisciplinary works are happening, then how do you measure integration? And again, that's a standards issue. We can set those standards. Number 3 was service level benchmarking. So if infrastructure starts setting up service level benchmarks which are people centered, then I think there is a opportunity that we could track it and enforce it. And one more very important learning from another session here itself was that if the systems, the service delivery systems, have deeper networks and deeper networking with other systems, then they become a little more adaptive. For example, if there is a big stress on some system, they are able to fall back on other systems. So deeper networking can enable people-centeredness of those.
Thank you, Sarabjit. Particularly the first point of having social science representation in developing projects. Ram, very quickly, you've got about 23 seconds.
Yeah, I just want to highlight only one point, Kamal. I think 3 years back, I think the same topic you highlighted in the ICDRI, that we need to build a people-centric movement to demand for disaster-resilient infrastructure. I just would like to highlight the same point. We need to strengthen the civil society participation. The participation of civil society, if you see, it is quite strong in the post-emergency context. But where are they in the at the time of infrastructure planning and implementation? I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ram. Useful reminder. Santosh, you have the last word.
Just two things. One, that the whole of the lessons learned is coming, that rebuilding infrastructure, build back better, is going beyond bricks and mortars. So that would be the sense which we can draw today. And the second important thing, that how that CDRI's initiative can go where the cities are sinking or likely to. So their inbuilt infrastructure, how this coalition can actually help, because rehabilitation, we say, is the last resort, or shifting of the people. So how that CDRI coalitions can actually start looking at those initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Santosh. I think with that, we will need to wrap up this session. I will not attempt to do a summary. Very rich discussion. The two key things which came out throughout the 3 days was that the focus of this edition of the ICDRI on people-centered is very topical. Everyone is alive to that. I'm not yet sure that we've found tangible ways to really make it happen. There are examples. Shan reminded that participation in development is not a new thing. It is, we have decades of experience in this area. How can we transfer it to infrastructure resilience? We have to think about that. And the second thing is about interdependencies. The session before this was a very provocative session. We talk about when developing infrastructure, getting out of sectorial silos, but how do you actually do that when the projects themselves are conceptualized sector by sector? There again, we've got some hints of how we could move forward, but that is a conversation to be continued. I think with that, we wrap up this session. Thank you very much, and please don't move out of the hall, because we are already late for 2 minutes. By 2 minutes for the next session, we'll start right away. Thank you very much.